Hello, welcome to the third lecture. This one is over the brain and our biology and how it affects our behavior. Let's jump into this. The first, obviously, part of the brain that we're worried about, actually it's not part of the brain, it's part of the body. It's the nervous system, responsible for regulating all our internal functions, our learning, our memory, how involved in how we react to the outside world. It is everything. It's the one system that we can't replace with a machine. We have things that'll breathe for us, things that'll pump our blood, things that will digest our food to keep all of us going, but the nervous system is the one thing we cannot live without. There are two main parts to this. There's the central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is what connects the spinal cord to the rest of the world. It sends those messages between brain and spinal cord and all the rest of the parts of the body. All right, the main makeup of the nervous system is the neurons. There's another name for the nerve cell. It's over 100 billion of them. Most of them are located in the brain, but everything else is made of these neurons. This part of the neuron is the cell body. It produces the energy that fuels the activity of the cell. This is where the nucleus is and all the mitochondria and all those other things you learned about in biology. It's all located in the cell body. The other part are the dendrites. This is the receiver of information. It receives information from other neurons and passes it through the cell body. Now, once it goes to the cell excuse me. Once it goes through the cell body, it decides whether to send it on or not, and that'll go through the axon. The axon carries the message away from the cell. Only one of these per neuron. It could be a fraction of an inch long, like some of the ones in the back of your hand, or they could be several feet long, a couple that are in your leg that go all the way up the back of your leg. Now, to protect that axon, we have myelin, or sometimes it's called the myelin sheath. It's this fatty substance that's wrapped around them. If you've ever cleaned any animals, like you've been hunting or something like that, you'll see a gooey white substance around these neurons or these axons, and that is called the myelin sheath. It speeds up, protects it. All has to do with transmission of that message. Next part of the axon terminal. They're the branches at the end of the axon. They have little sacs stored there, which we'll talk about here in just a few seconds. Now, to go across from one neuron to the next, you would think, at least originally they thought it was some kind of an electrical charge, but it's not an electrical charge, it's a chemical charge. It's the gap between the axon terminal of one and the dendrites of the next one. And the messages only travel in one direction. They do not go backwards. Once it's used for an impulse to the brain, it is not used to react to that impulse. There are two types of these neurons. The sensory neurons are the ones who carry it to the brain, and the motor neurons are the ones who carry back the impulse to do something, whether it be move or react to it or in any way. The messages can be disrupted. Occasionally there are issues. The biggest thing now that you hear about all the time in the news, especially if you watch any football, is a concussion. It's when the tissue of the brain hits against the skull and bruises. It can cause a lot of different things to happen. Well, a bruise, just like on your arm, has an abundance of red blood cells. They all rush there, and if it happens in the brain, since the brain is somewhat sealed in there, well, it's not somewhat, it is sealed in there, so if you are having a concussion, all that goes there and there's no place to release all that pressure. So it'll cause, sometimes you'll have memory loss, sometimes you'll have dizziness, sometimes people will pass out. All different things that can happen, but none of it is actually good. Now, all messages are sent through neurotransmitters. These are these chemicals that I spoke of earlier. They're chemicals that are stored in sacs on the axon terminals. When they fire, they spray out onto the dendrites, and there are specific receptor sites on these dendrites that receive specific chemicals. They're very hard to find. It can occur up to 100 times a second. It's very, very difficult to isolate these. Each neurotransmitter has a specific purpose. For example, we've got 4 of them here. Acetylcholine is for muscle control of your skeletal muscles. People that have MS and diseases like that, they've linked some of that to acetylcholine or levels of acetylcholine that aren't quite normal. Dopamine, which is your fine motor skills, This is where Parkinson's disease has been linked to this. So you see that little shake that people that are Parkinson's patients have. That is because the dopamine levels are off. Then there's noradrenaline, which prepares the body for action. That is not the same as adrenaline. Adrenaline is something different. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But noradrenaline gets all of your nerves ready to go, and because you're going to need them for fight or flight later on. And serotonin, which is your emotional arousal and sleep. Once you have sex, the serotonin is released into the system, and it causes especially males to fall right asleep after that all takes place. So it's not really his fault. The central nervous system, we'll talk a little bit about this. Obviously, we spend more time on the brain, but the brain and the spinal cord make that up. The brain is protected by your skull, and the spinal cord is protected by your spine. It's a series of different vertebrae, and in between them you have a series of discs which allow you to move freely. It is involved in your spinal reflex. I put on there that the pain comes later. What I mean by this is that, let's say you pick up a hot pan. Before you ever realize that it's hot, you've already dropped it, because the impulse has gone towards the brain, but it gets stopped at the spine. The spine knows what to do. It doesn't need to go and interpret it somewhere else. It sends back a message to let go of the pan, and then it sends that impulse onto the brain. So you've already dropped it before you even realize that it is actually hot. That's called the spinal reflex. The peripheral nervous system, there are a couple of divisions of this. It's what branches out from the spinal cord out to the rest of the body. You have the somatic, which sends in for sensory information to and from the central nervous system, and it's responsible for your touch, your pain, changes in temperature, body position, posture, balance. It's your input mode. It's what you receive, and it all comes from the somatic. The other part of it is the autonomic. This is the part that regulates what's going on. Your heartbeat, your breathing, digestion, your blood pressure. You don't have to think about these things. You would die if you had to, because you wouldn't be able to think about anything else. It has two divisions as well. You have the sympathetic, which prepares your body for action, your fight or flight, suppresses your digestion, increases your heart rate, elevates your blood pressure, all the things you need to either fight the bear or run from the bear. Two things. Now, it suppresses your digestion because the last thing your body needs to worry about when you're being chased by a bear is digesting that hamburger, so it shuts it down. So if you've ever run in races, or you've been in plays, or you do some kind of sports, you get that upset stomach before you actually do, or maybe you even have to go to the bathroom even though you don't have to actually go. It's because this digestive system is being shut down, because it doesn't need to worry about that at that particular time. Your parasympathetic is what slows you back down. The bear runs away, or you escape from the bear, or you shoot the bear, or something like that. Well, the parasympathetic will slow you back down to normal. If you've ever seen a fight in school, you look around at the kids around it, everybody's jacked up. Their sympathetic system is totally kicked in. After it's over, everybody gets back to their classroom. Give it a few minutes, and the parasympathetic is slowing everybody back down where they're supposed to be. Now, let's talk about the brain quite a bit here. It's composed of many parts that work together to organize our movements, create our thoughts, form our emotions, produce our behaviors. In other words, the brain is what makes you, you. It's divided into three sections. The rear section is the hindbrain. It's responsible for our vital functions. This is the most basic section of the brain. It's what keeps us alive. Our heart rate, respiration, balance. Three different parts of it. There's the medulla. It controls your heart rate, your blood pressure, your breathing, all very, very important. The pons, which regulate your movement, your attention, sleep, alertness, keeps you awake, keeps you doing what you're supposed to be doing, alerts you to different things going on outside. And the cerebellum, which is your balance and your coordination. It's what keeps you upright, keeps you moving, keeps you walking, keeps you doing all those basic things. The next part of the brain is the midbrain. This is responsible for your vision and hearing. It contains part of what's called the reticular activating system, which is responsible for your attention, sleep, and arousal. When it's aroused, it increases your heart rate, your blood pressure, your brain activity. I put on there that noise is stimulated, but these things can be filtered. What the reticular activating system is doing It is what paralyzes you while you sleep. If you sleepwalk, you're having issues with this particular system of your brain. Because if you didn't have this system, you would act out whatever's in your brain. You'd be walking, you'd be doing all these different things. But since this system has shut down and paralyzed the rest of your body, you can dream away and not worry about having to live through any of the stuff that you're dreaming. Now, noises will stimulate it. Like some people, married couples, will have different alarms. One alarm will wake one person up, another alarm will wake another person up. You've been trained to listen for specific things. If you're sitting in the middle of the lunchroom and somebody starts saying your name at a table a couple tables away, you're like a prairie dog. You're like, somebody's saying my name. Somebody's saying my name. Try it next time you're eating lunch down there. Just say somebody's name just a little bit louder than the rest of the dim roar of the lunchroom, and that person will be looking like a little prairie dog with their head sticking up. It's kind of fun to do, actually. All right, the forebrain. This is what separates us from the rest of the mammals. This is very complex thinking. It has the thalamus, which is the inner chamber of the brain. Most of the message coming from the sense organs go through here on their way to higher levels for interpretation and thought. This is the message center of the brain. Everything flows through the thalamus and then sends it to different areas of the brain for to determine whether some action needs to be taken, to pull up memories of whatever they're hearing or seeing. It's a very important part of the brain. The hypothalamus, which is sometimes called the pleasure center of the brain. It's vital to the regulation of temperatures, storage of nutrients, aspects of motivation and emotion. It's involved in our hunger, our thirst, sexual behavior, caring of offspring, aggression. This is what is the part of the brain that is very basic, very simple. Stay alive, eat, make more babies, all these things, very important. And they all come from this little bitty part of the brain called the hypothalamus. The limbic system, involved in learning, memory, emotion, hunger, sex, aggression. Now you notice a lot of these things overlap. Well, that's because if one part of the brain gets damaged, another part of the brain can take over for it. If you have damage in your limbic system, you'll have plenty of long-term memory, but no short-term memory. You can remember what happened 10 years ago, but you can't remember what you had for breakfast. The cerebrum. This is the big part of the brain. This is 70% of your brain. It is what you picture a brain with that big gray matter. It's usually your picture in the cerebrum. The cerebral cortex is the surface of that brain. It does the thinking. It's concerned with our memory, language, emotion, complex motor functions, perceptions, and more. We really don't know exactly how it works. It's the ironic part of this is that the brain is not smart enough to understand itself. We really don't understand how it works. So it's kind of wild. The cerebral cortex is composed of two different sides called hemispheres. They are connected by the corpus callosum. Each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body. So if you have a stroke, which is a stoppage or a clog in one of the blood vessels on your left side of your brain, it affects the right side of the body. You can't use your right arm, your right leg. There are 4 sections of each hemisphere, and they're called lobes. And some sensations are received primarily by one lobe, but most use several. One of these is the occipital lobe. It's located in the back of the cerebral cortex. It is your visual area. Damage to this area would cause people to recognize something but not differentiate between others. Like, I hand you a thing of keys, you'd say, yeah, those are keys, but you couldn't tell me which was your house key, which was your car key. So that's what the occipital lobe would do. The next is the temporal lobe. This is where your hearing and auditory functions are. People that have damage there would hear but not recognize what the sound is. They'd go, I hear something, but I don't really know what that is. Kind of wild. Then there's the parietal lobe, which are your skin senses, determine whether you're hot, cold, or being touched. And then the frontal lobe, which is your motor area. It's how we move all of our body parts. This is what gives us the ability to write. If you're taking notes right now, your frontal lobe is taken over. The association area of the cerebral cortex shapes the information into something meaningful. necessary for our complex thought. We'll talk more about it later.